Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank Chairman Hastings, Ranking Member DeFazio, Chairman Bishop, and Ranking Member Grijalva for allowing me to testify before the Subcommittee on Public Lands and Environmental Regulation. I'm honored that the committee would include my bill, H.R. 4119, the West Hunter Street Baptist Church Study Act, as part of today's hearing. This is an important piece of legislation for the people of Georgia's 4th Congressional District, who I represent, but also for the thousands of heroes who fought tirelessly during the civil rights movement for equality in the South and throughout the country. I would also like to thank you, the committee members, for your time and consideration of this bill. The West Hunter Street Baptist Church Study Act, with 76 co-sponsors from both parties, would authorize the Department of the Interior to conduct a study of the West Hunter Street Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, to determine if it meets the requirements to become part of the National Park System. According to the National Park Service, a site may be considered for designation as a national park if it is associated with significant events and people in our nation's history and contributes to the understanding of these historic events and figures. During the Civil Rights Movement, the West Hunter Street Baptist Church served as the headquarters for many civil rights workers and organizers. It was the site of many important leadership meetings and doubled as a school for nonviolent protests during the initiatives such as the Voter Education Project and the Freedom Summer of 1964. It was also a spiritual refuge for the countless men and women who devoted their lives to the cause. The Reverend Dr. Ralph David Abernathy, Sr., the church's pastor, was a close associate of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He helped lead the bus boycotts after Rosa Parks famously refused to give up her seat. Reverend Abernathy Sr. assumed his position at the church at Dr. King's urging, following the success of the Freedom Rides. He was the pastor at West Hunter Street Baptist Church until his death in 1990. Passage of this bill will allow the Department of Interior to assess how to more fully preserve and honor the contributions of all who played significant roles in advancing freedom and human rights. I urge the members of this committee to remember the pivotal nature of the civil rights movement. When considering this bill, think of what the movement meant to our nation and the world. As Dr. King said, the struggle for civil rights lifted our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Finally, I would ask unanimous consent to submit these letters in support of the legislation from the Coalition for the People's Agenda, the SCLC, and also the Washington Bureau of the NAACP into the record. Thank you. I thank you for your time and consideration, and I'd be pleased to take any questions.
Reverend Abernathy, we appreciate you joining us here. And at this time, we would recognize you to speak towards this piece of legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member DeFazio, honorable members of the committee. On behalf of the American Civil Rights Movement, a legacy steeped in the moral principles of nonviolence and civil disobedience, and for the preservation of American history, I address you today. I speak with the support of the honorable gentleman from Georgia, Congressman Hank Johnson and Congressman Austin Scott, and 76 of their colleagues, members of this august body. And most importantly, I speak with the support of the Vine City communities and the Atlanta University community, in which this historic church resides on the Martin Luther King Jr. corridor. Not only is this church historical, but the area is as well in helping shape American society. This community became a think tank for the American Civil Rights Movement after Montgomery, Alabama. And the West 100th Street Baptist Church became the spiritual workplace. Across the street from the church, Pascal's restaurant, lounge, and hotel became a place to convene with civil rights leaders Dr. Abernathy and Dr. King, and activists, community leaders, educators, clergy, businessmen and women, black entertainers and actors, and many others. The church held many civil rights mass meetings, strategy sessions, and nonviolent conflict resolution trainings. Decisions were made at this church that had a direct impact on influencing American culture. For example, the decision was made at this church for the go-ahead for the Selma to Montgomery March on the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Sunday, March 7th, 1963, which is known in American history as Bloody Sunday, which changed the face of American policy with the passing of the Voting Rights Act and helping shape a more perfect union. When white students came from the North to help register blacks in the South during what is known in history as Freedom Summer, voter education project, the church served as a training and workshop center for the Mississippi Summer Project, where black students and white students attended nonviolent workshops and conflict resolution seminars in an effort to conduct voter registration drives throughout the South with emphasis on Mississippi and Alabama. The church provided space for the Atlanta University Student Association called UMBU, United Movement for Black Unity, get out the vote operations to elect Maynard Jackson as the first black mayor of a major city in the South. And the church was the meeting place and conducted strategy and field operations to elect Andrew Young, first black congressman from Georgia. This historic preservation of the West 100th Street Baptist Church represents commitment to remembering the past and preparing for a sustainable future. By preserving historic structures, we're able to share the very spaces and environments in which the generations before us lived. Historic preservation is a visual and tangible conservation of cultural identity. In addition to solidifying a community's past, preservation can help strengthen a community's future. Historic buildings help create a vibrant cultural area that draw tourism, art, festivals, and other activities, which in turn draw investment, revenue, and economic growth. This museum, community educational resource center will be a centerpiece for the community. Local residents can also benefit through interactive components such as learning and educational resources that illustrate a special meaning between its past, present, and future. The Ralph David Abernathy National Historic Center will become a hub for the community empowerment and will feature interactive gallery tours. Our goal is to create and promote a learning environment of the moral principles of nonviolence for the entire family. We will offer an educational resource center for student research on the civil rights movement. Parents and K through 12 students will have an educational resource focused on the civil rights movement and the 6 pioneers of that movement with the Remember Them monument to help bridge the gap between the past and the present generations. It is more than a historic site, it's a center for empowerment and transformation, a living legacy. The preservation of this last historic civil rights church site will also be a park, Freedom Plaza, to encourage families to gather, reflect, and interact with nature and history. My father, Dr. Ralph David Abernathy Sr., and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. were co-founders and co-leaders of the American Civil Rights Movement. They started out together in Montgomery, Alabama, when my father was called to organize the first meeting around Ms. Parks' arrest. And together, as civil rights twins, until the assassination of Dr. King, who died cradled in my father's arms. My father, with the courage to walk alone, picked up the mantle of leadership and completed the work of the civil rights movement. They had a date with destiny, Mr. Chairman, and a rendezvous with eternity. And I encourage the passage of this most important legislation in honor of their great American legacy. Thank you, and God bless you. Any questions that you may have, I'm available.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We'll now turn to questions on this particular piece of legislation. Mr. Grijalva.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. No questions, just to thank my colleague, Congressman Johnson, for the legislation, and thank the Reverend for his testimony today. You mentioned the Reverend living legacy. How true. I think all of us know that the civil rights movement made this nation a better nation, made all of us better people. And as we go forward, this is not just a historic set-aside. It is indeed more than a reminder. It points the way to where this nation still needs to go. And I want to thank you and thank both of you, and yield back.